Good morning, and welcome to another King Paramount video. Today, we are not going to do anything controversial, we are not going to talk politics, we're not going to do anything which could cause people to be unpleasant in the comments. We are going to do the second in my series of then and now. In other words, looking at old photographs of the canal system and finding whereabouts they were taken. Today, we are looking at Milton Keynes. Now, the interesting thing about looking at Milton Keynes is that the canal through Milton Keynes is drastically different to the way it was built. I mean, not in terms of the actual canal itself, but in terms of the city. Most cities or new towns, when they're built, sort of join up a whole bunch of smaller villages and so on. And that is sort of true of Milton Keynes, in that it fills in the area between the triangle of the three towns of Fenny Stratford, Wolverton and Newport Pagnell. However, what was in between those three towns was largely nothing. There are a few small villages, but not very many, and so therefore there aren't all that many photographs which are identifiably from Milton Keynes area in the sort of 19th and early 20th centuries. Now, having said that, one of the little villages in the Milton Keynes area was Milton Keynes, and rather brilliantly, when they built Milton Keynes, the new town, they decided to rename the village of Milton Keynes as Middleton, so no one would get confused. And what happened was, nobody in the village took a blind bit of notice. They all kept on calling it Milton Keynes. If they were feeling particularly useful, they'd call it Milton Keynes Village. And so in Milton Keynes, you will find plenty of signs pointing to a village called Middleton, which nobody at all calls Middleton. In any case, before we start looking at our first photographs, let's go and have a look at the map and see what we are talking about. Okay, here we are looking at modern Milton Keynes, and if we look back at the 19th century Ordnance Survey maps, you can see that modern Milton Keynes broadly consists of nothing at all. So we are going to start today's journey in Fenny Stratford, and then we're going to wander up through Simpson and Wafton and Woolston and Linford, and we're going to end in New Bradwell. So let's go and make a start. So here we are at our first location, which is Fenny Stratford, and indeed Fenny Lock. And of all our locations, this is the one that bears the strongest resemblance to what it originally was. We have still got some canal cottages. We've still got the Red Lion pub. We still have the lockkeeper's cottage. And we have this lock. This lock has got a fall or rise of 6 inches. And it wasn't originally here. It was put in because they were concerned about water loss from the Long Pound up north of us. That's going that way. And it was more or less put in as a stop lock. And it's been doing that purpose ever since the early 19th century. Now, avoiding being run over by the Marston's lorry, we're going to go down here and we're going to turn round. There's our railway bridge, and we're going to have a look at our first sort of scene, as it were. And as I say, this area is largely identical to how it was in the photographs. It is worth saying that there is a swing bridge bang in the middle of that lock. That's quite an unusual thing, and that swing bridge has variously been there and not there over the years. It was last put back into use in the 1990s, and here it remains. So Fenny Stratford, our first stop. After here, it gets a little bit more difficult to pick out exactly where we are. So here we are at our next stop, which is the village of Simpson. Now, quite a lot of places in Milton Keynes had to have made-up names because they built them. And quite a lot of those places basically sound like they were looking around the office, just naming them after random things they saw in the office. So you've got like Coffee Hall and Bean Hill, and Simpson sounds a little bit like MTV was on in the background. But no, Simpson is an original village, and our next set of photographs comes from around here. Now, it's quite difficult to place precisely where they are because this part of the canal has changed quite a lot, but I reckon we are roughly in this area. These photographs are interesting because it might look at first sight as if the boat is in the process of sinking. It's not. It's an icebreaker. So what happens is the horse tows a sort of quite pointy-bowed boat up onto the ice, and then people standing on the boat rock it backwards and forwards really violently, and it smashes the ice up, which is pretty cool. So the other thing you can see in these photographs is a set of telegraph poles. So what we call telegraph poles nowadays are normally not, they are telephone poles, but telegraph poles with all those big, large numbers of T-pieces on them carried individual Morse code or other types of code messages along the wires, and they were a major thing in the early part of the 20th century, now almost entirely gone, as have the poles. So here we are, some photographs of Simpson. Okay, once you get north of Simpson, the original villages around the Milton Keynes area kind of dry up for a while. We are, in fact, several miles north of Simpson, and this is a modern expression of an original village called either Woolston or Woolstone, depending on when you are thinking about it. So, the canal runs through here very nicely, and we've come to one of the few photographs which exists on this particular stretch of canal, and it is of this bridge here. Now, this bridge is a relatively modern bridge. It was built in the 1920s, and it was built so the original village of Woolston is the other side of those trees. Today it is also extended this side as well. But this bridge was built as a footbridge to allow people to get from one side of the original village to where they were building some more modern villages on the other side. We've got another feature of the canal here, which is the canal Broadwalk. It was put in the 1970s, and it runs not on the towpath but parallel to the towpath for miles and miles and miles up and down the canal in Milton Keynes. It links to some other major cycle paths, and it is a really brilliant idea for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's nice and dry, you can go for a lovely walk, there are trees, there's the canal, it's all lovely. But the second thing is, if you are, for example, somebody who is, coming back from the pub mildly drunk, or you're a teenager who wants to ride their dirt bike illegally around Milton Keynes, you're going to do it on that, and you're not going to do it on the towpath. Hooray! So it keeps towpath nice and clear and clean for boaters and fishermen and walkers and other people. However, that isn't why we're here. We are here. Just walk a few steps south so I can turn round. We can see Bridge 85. There you go. A lovely bridge And the photograph that we have of it is this, when they were obviously terribly proud of it in the 1920s. Now then, as I said, canal features and therefore canal photographs get few and far between in this stretch of canal because it was largely rural. Worth noting, by the way, that it still looks largely rural, even though we are bang in the centre of Milton Keynes. In fact, the original village of Milton Keynes, the one that they tried to call Middleton and failed, is just the other side of those trees there as well. So we really are very much in the centre of a city, and it does not feel like it, does it? Magnificent. Let's move on to the next place. All right then, here we are at our penultimate stop, and that is Great Linford. Now, Great Linford is the first of our stops that we have come to that was a genuine canal destination. So there was a wharf here. And also it's the first of our stops we've come to which was a canal junction. Now, I've done a video before about the Newport Pagnell Canal. It was a spectacularly unsuccessful canal. To give you an idea of how unsuccessful it was, not only did it only last 40 years before it was filled in and turned into a railway, but it hasn't even made the list of most unsuccessful canals in Britain. That's how unsuccessful it was. Couldn't even make the list of worst canals, some of which closed after 5 years, 2 years, 6 months, and in one case in Ireland, a canal which closed after precisely one boat had passed through it. In any case, the Newport Pagnell Canal was moderately successful for 40 years, but then it turned out railways would be more successful. Now, most of the photographs I'm going to show you are taken over on that opposite bank, where there used to be an additional towpath. That towpath has long since crumbled into dust, so we can't go and get exact photographs. But nonetheless, buildings you might recognise is the old pub, which has been renamed the Old Wharf House. Wrongly, it wasn't the Wharf House. The Wharf House was this building beyond it. And you might say, well, hold on, that's not on a wharf. Well, it was, because if you see that area of different canal bank, that used to be a bridge into the Newport Pagnell branch, and one of the photographs, which was taken over on that side, shows that bridge. You shall see that in a minute. So let's walk up and we will have a look. Now then, most people think that the Newport Pagnell Canal went down this path here. That's not quite true. This is the towpath for the canal. The Newport Pagnell Canal went through this brick wall here and right past this building. I won't stick my thing up and over into the garden because it's someone's private garden, but this is a wharf house. And looking down this path, you can just see a sort of yellow bricked thing with a peaked roof. That is the lock cottage of the first lock, which is more or less where that white van is parked. In any case, here is Great Linford. Here is Great Linford Wharf. Now let's have a photo stream of some photographs from this area. Okay, so here we are at our last stop for today, which is New Bradwell. And in fact, you can see Utopia Limited, my boat, just there. So this is where I'm moored. However, New Bradwell has got a very new town name. And if we have a look at the map, we can see that it's laid out on a grid system. So it's pretty obvious that New Bradwell is part of the new town. And that is true. But the new town that it is part of is not Milton Keynes. The new town that New Bradwell is part of is Wolverton. and it was built in the 1820s as the first railway town. And if we turn around here, we can see the subject of our last photograph, which is the bridge, Stantonbury Bridge, just at New Bradwell. It's now part of Milton Keynes called Stantonbury. Stantonbury was a village, but it has long since been knocked down and turned into a quarry, so Stantonbury now is just an area of Milton Keynes. However, this bridge has been photographed, albeit it's not actually this bridge. It was replaced in the 1960s, and in the 1920s, it looked like this. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this little wander through Milton Keynes. The next Then and Now video I will do, I think, will be Wolverton and Cosgrove to the north of Milton Keynes, of which there are many more photographs. But nevertheless, I hope you've enjoyed the photographs you have seen. Have a lovely new year. If you like these videos, please do like and subscribe, and I shall see you again next time. Goodbye.